All right. I want to welcome everyone to class. What we're going to do here in this brief presentation is to just focus on the difference, on basically what a social problem is, and talk about the difference between the objective element versus the subjective element of a social problem, because a lot of students have issues with that. And you need to know the difference between the objective and the subjective, because it's going to be on both of your papers and you're going to have exam questions that are based on this. So let's get into it. All right, so we're going to talk about what exactly is a social problem. And as I said before, to define a social problem, you have to differentiate the difference between the objective element as well as the subjective element. Now, the objective element, this is where you provide proof that a social condition or a problem exists in our society. Now, proof can be through personal experience, it could be through conducting research or being exposed to the mass media. Through, you could watch TV and be aware of certain problems within our society. You can, watch videos or whatever the case may be. Now, we're going to use, or I'm going to use the example of homelessness. And so that is the social condition that we're going to focus on in this presentation, and use the issue of homelessness to differentiate the difference between the objective versus the subjective element. Now, remember we said here that the objective element is where you provide proof that a problem exists. So if you were to do some research, and for purposes of this class, I want you to everyone to do basic research when they're focusing on their particular social problem. So if you were to do basic research on homelessness in this country, you would see, for example, that HUD, which is a government agency, reports that there were over 580,000 Americans that were homeless in 2020. Now, so if your focus, if your social problem is homelessness, you would show that, there are more than 500,000 people in 2020 that were homeless. And so that is objective proof based on research. And so this is where research is important. So when you're providing proof, when you're writing your paper and providing proof, I want you to do basic research, and you need to make sure that the source that you're using is, factual. I do not want you to use any blogs or, Facebook or anything like that, because unfortunately there's a lot of fake news from those sources. So you need to make sure that you use proper sources and scholarly sources when conducting your research. Now, the subjective element is the belief that a social condition or a social or a problem exactly is harmful to our society, and because it's harmful, it should and can be changed. Now, again, we're using the example of homelessness, and if I was to ask you guys, why is homelessness harmful to our society? And you can think about a variety of different ways in which homelessness is harmful to our society. You can argue that if homelessness is harmful to our society because it leads to higher levels of poverty. Obviously, it could even lead to crime. It could lead to drug use, because sometimes because you're homeless, you may feel depressed and you may feel like life is not worth anything. So you can think about all of the harms that an increase in numbers of people being homeless, how this affects society. And so this is part of the subjective element, where you focus on the harm that this condition causes our society. So, you talk about, why is homelessness harmful to our society? You will talk about, the variety of different ways in which homelessness is harmful to our society. And that would be part of your subjective element. Now, when you combine these two elements here, this is where you arrive at the definition of a social problem. And as our textbook argues, a social problem is a social condition that segments of society views as harmful to members of the society, and as a result of being harmful, it needs to be remedied, it needs to be solved, or its impact needs to be. So just to summarize again, remember we said here that the objective element is where you provide evidence from research that a social condition exists. And again, if you use the example of homelessness, you could provide basic research from the HUD.gov reports that over 500 380,000 Americans experience homelessness in 2020. That would be, again, part of your objective element. Again, we said here that the subjective element is a belief that a social condition is harmful to our society. So this is where you can talk about, homelessness is harmful to our society because it leads to high levels of crime. Potentially, it could lead to high levels of poverty and so forth and so on. And so those are, or that is the difference between the objective element of a social problem versus that of the subjective element.